The young man sat alone in the quiet of the early morning, the kind of quiet that feels heavy and thick, like a blanket pressing down on the world. His name was William, and he was a groundskeeper at the old city cemetery. For 3 years, this had been his life. He knew every headstone, every overgrown path, and every ancient weeping willow by heart. But his world, his entire reason for being, was contained in the small, well-tended plot in the far corner, beneath the largest of those willows. That was where Kate lay. Kate. Just the thought of her name was enough to make his chest ache with a familiar dull pain. He remembered her laugh, a sound so bright and genuine it could chase away the darkest clouds. He remembered the way her hand felt in his, small and warm, a perfect fit. He remembered the life they had planned, and a future so vivid it felt like a memory of something that had already happened. And then, in a single senseless moment on a rain-slicked highway, it was all taken away. The future became a ghost, and William became a ghost himself, haunting the only place where he still felt close to her. His routine was his anchor. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, he would arrive. He would pull the few stray weeds that dared to sprout on her grave. He would gently wipe the morning dew from the smooth, gray headstone. Her name was etched there, simple and elegant, Catherine Ann. Below it, the dates that marked the beginning and the cruel, abrupt end. And below that, the inscription they had chosen together, in a time when they thought they had forever. Her heart was a pure, endless summer. He would talk to her then. He'd tell her about the family of robins that had nested in the willow's branches, about the new groundskeeper who was always losing his rake, about the small stray dog he'd seen near the gates the day before. It was a one-sided conversation, of course, but it was the only conversation that mattered to him anymore. The world outside the cemetery gates had become a noisy, chaotic place he didn't understand and had no desire to be a part of. Inside, with Kate, there was a silence he could fill with his love. His dedication had not gone unnoticed. Over the years, the people who came to visit their own loved ones would see him. They saw the way he tended to that one particular grave, not with the detached efficiency of a worker, but with the reverent tenderness of a lover. Some whispered, calling him the ghost of the graveyard. Others, and who knew a part of his story, simply felt a profound and quiet sorrow for him. They saw a man frozen in time, a man whose life had stopped on the same day as his wife's. One such person was Mrs. Eleanor Vance, an elderly widow who visited her husband's grave 2 plots away from Kate's. She was a perceptive woman with kind, intelligent eyes. She had watched William for months, and she saw past the quiet, solitary figure. She saw a deep, abiding love. But she also saw a man who was slowly fading away, becoming as still and silent as the stones around him. He was a living monument to grief, and it pained her heart to witness it. One Tuesday afternoon she approached him. He was on his knees, carefully planting a small cluster of purple and white crocuses around the base of Kate's headstone. He looked up, startled, his eyes wary. "They're beautiful," Mrs. Vance said softly, her voice gentle. "She would have loved them. My Robert, he could never remember the names of flowers. He'd just bring me bunches of whatever he picked from the side of the road. Said they were pretty ones." William just nodded, his throat too tight for words. He wasn't used to talking to people here. "I see you here every day," she continued, not pushing, just stating a fact. "You take such wonderful care of her. That's a special kind of love." William looked back at the headstone, his hand resting on the cool grass. "It's all I have left to give her," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. Mrs. Vance didn't say anything for a long moment. She simply stood there, a comforting presence. "You know," she finally said, "Robert's been gone for 12 years now. The pain doesn't go away." "No, not really. It just changes. It finds a new place to live inside you, a quieter place. But it shouldn't be the only thing that lives there. She gave him a small, sad smile and walked back to her husband's grave. Her words lingered in William's mind long after she had left. They unsettled him. The pain was the only thing that felt real, the only thing that connected him to Kate. The thought of it becoming quieter felt like a betrayal, as if moving on, even an inch, meant forgetting her. He clung to his grief like a life raft in a vast, empty ocean. The next day, his routine was broken by the arrival of a young woman. She was maybe in her early 20s with a hesitant walk and eyes red from crying. She stood at the edge of the cemetery, a piece of paper in her hand, looking lost. She was clearly looking for a specific grave. After watching her wander for 10 minutes, William approached her. "Can I help you find someone?" he asked. She jumped, startled, then nodded, holding out the paper. It was a name and a plot number. William looked at it. It was an older section of the cemetery, one he knew well. He nodded and silently led the way. They walked through the winding paths until they came to a simple, weathered headstone. It was for her father, who had passed away a decade ago. She explained, her voice trembling, that she had been living abroad and had never been able to visit his grave. She was leaving the country again in a few days and was terrified she wouldn't be able to find it. William watched as she knelt down, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs as she traced the letters of her father's name. He saw his own grief reflected in her. It was raw, afresh, and overwhelming. But he also saw something else. He saw a daughter who had traveled thousands of miles to say goodbye, to connect with a past she still loved. It was an act of love, not of despair. He quietly left her to her mourning, but something had shifted inside him. He looked around the cemetery, not just at Kate's grave, but at all the graves. They weren't just stones and dates. They were anchors for the living, places for love to go when the person it was meant for was no longer there. He realized then, with a clarity that felt like a physical blow, that he had been using Kate's grave as an anchor, but he had let it chain him to the bottom of the ocean. He hadn't been visiting a place of love. He had been living in a place of death. That evening, for the first time in 3 years, he didn't stay until the sun went down. He left while there was still light in the sky. He walked through the city streets, a world that felt foreign and loud. He saw couples laughing outside cafes, children chasing each other in a park, people rushing home from work. Life. It was all around him, messy, noisy, and vibrant. It felt jarring, almost offensive, but it was real. When he got back to his small, sparse apartment, the silence that greeted him was different from the cemetery's silence. This was a lonely silence. It was filled with the ghosts of their life together. A bookshelf with his books in the empty space where hers used to be. A wall that still bore the faint mark where a painting she loved had hung. A kitchen he never used because cooking for one felt pointless. He sat in the dark for a long time. For the first time, and he allowed himself to fully confront the question, what now? He couldn't live in the cemetery forever. Kate wouldn't have wanted that. The woman he loved, with her endless summer heart, would have been heartbroken to see him wither away in the shade of a willow tree. She would have wanted him to live. The thought was terrifying. It felt like the ultimate betrayal. But the more he sat with it, the more he understood it wasn't a betrayal of Kate, but a final, most profound act of love for her. Loving her meant honoring the life she had, not worshiping the death that took her. The next morning, when he went to the cemetery, he didn't go straight to her grave. He went to the main office and, with a heavy heart and a clear head, he submitted his resignation. The groundskeeper, a gruff but fair man named Arthur, just nodded. And he had seen this story play out before, in different ways. "I understand, son," Arthur said, his voice low. "You take care of yourself now." William's last day as a groundskeeper was, fittingly, a day of unseasonable warmth. The sun felt different on his skin as he performed his final duties. He cleaned the main fountain, trimmed the hedges along the main path, and did a final walkthrough. He saved Kate's grave for last. He spent a long time there. He pruned the willow branches that hung too low. He refreshed the soil around the crocuses, which were now blooming in full, vibrant color, and he polished the headstone until it gleamed in the afternoon light. He sat before it, his back against the familiar trunk of the willow. "I don't know what I'm going to do, Kate," he whispered to the air. "I have no idea, but I'm going to try." For you. Because you were life, Kate. You were pure, endless life. And I can't dishonor that by forgetting how to live my own. He stayed there until the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. It was the most beautiful sunset he had seen in 3 years. Then he stood up, kissed his fingers, and pressed them to the cool stone for the very last time, and walked away. Leaving the cemetery gates behind him felt like stepping off a cliff. He had no plan. The world was a vast, terrifying, and indifferent place. He spent the first few weeks in a daze, wandering the city, trying to remember how to be a part of it. He got a small room in a boarding house. He took a job at a local bookstore, a quiet place run by a man named Mr. Henderson, who didn't ask questions and appreciated an employee who could alphabetize with monastic devotion. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a toehold in the world of the living. The days were manageable. The work kept his hands busy and his mind occupied. It was the nights that were hard. The quiet apartment he'd left, the new impersonal room he was in now, it didn't matter. In the silence, the memories would come, sharp and painful. He'd see her smile as she tried to cook a complicated meal, hear her laughter as they danced in their tiny living room, feel the ghost of her hand in his. The grief was no less real, no less present. But Mrs. Vance had been right. It was finding a quieter place. It was a dull ache now, a part of him, not the whole of him. One afternoon, a woman came into the bookstore. She was flustered, juggling a large stack of books, a handbag, and an umbrella. As she turned, the stack tilted and began to fall. William, moving with a speed he didn't know he still possessed, caught them just before they hit the floor. As he helped her gather them, their eyes met. Her name was Sarah. She had kind eyes, the color of warm honey, and a smile that was quick and genuine. "Thank you so much," she said, her voice light. "I'm a menace in a bookstore. I get so excited my arms just can't keep up." William managed a small smile. "It happens to the best of us." She came in often after that. She was an art teacher at a local school, always looking for books on specific artists or new project ideas for her students. Their conversations started as brief exchanges at the counter, then grew longer as she lingered to chat. How she talked about her students, about a funny thing her cat did, about a new exhibition at the city gallery. William found himself listening, genuinely interested. He even found himself talking, sharing small, safe things about the books he was reading, about a funny customer he'd helped. It was strange and wonderful to feel a connection with another living soul, a connection not rooted in a shared past, but in the simple, present moment. Months passed. His friendship with Sarah deepened. She never pushed him, never asked about the sadness she could see lingering in his eyes. She simply offered him her presence, her laughter, her vibrant, living world. One evening, she invited him to an opening at a small art gallery, a showcase of her students' work. He went, nervous and out of his element, be surrounded by chattering people and brightly colored paintings. He saw Sarah across the room animatedly talking to a proud parent. She caught his eye and gave him a warm, reassuring smile. Standing there, surrounded by life and creativity and joy, William felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion. It wasn't the familiar, crushing weight of grief. It was something else. It was a sense of being present, of being a part of something. He looked at a painting by a 7-year-old girl, a chaotic swirl of colors that was meant to be her family. It was messy and imperfect, but it was full of life. It was beautiful. He thought of Kate then, not with a stab of pain, but with a warm, familiar ache. He thought of her endless summer. He realized that summer didn't have to end. It could live on in him. He could carry her warmth, her light, her love for life, and let it be a part of his own. Loving her hadn't ended when she died. It had just changed. And he was finally ready to let that love guide him back into the light. The next day, he went back to the cemetery. It was the first time since he had left. He didn't feel the familiar pull of despair. He simply felt he needed to visit. He walked the familiar paths, past the willow trees, past Mrs. Vance, who gave him a knowing smile from her husband's grave, until he stood before Kate's headstone. The crocuses he had planted were gone, replaced by the lush green of summer grass. The willow branches swayed gently in the breeze. He didn't kneel this time. He stood, his hands in his pockets, looking at the stone. "Hey," he said softly. "I met someone, a friend. Her name is Sarah. She's an art teacher. She's very kind. You'd like her." He paused, a small smile touching his lips. "I'm okay, Kate. I really am. It took a long time, but I think I finally understand. You're not here, but you're also not gone. You're in every sunset. You're in the spring flowers. You're in the way I see the world now. Thank you for loving me. I'll love you forever." He stood there for a few more moments, letting the peace of the place wash over him. Then, he turned and walked away. This time, when he left the cemetery gates, he didn't feel like he was stepping off a cliff. He felt like he was walking towards something, towards a life he had thought was lost, a future he never thought he'd have. A few years later, the story of the young groundskeeper had become a quiet legend. A whisper passed between the regular visitors. They would point out the spot under the willow tree, and now covered in a beautiful, self-seated carpet of purple and white crocuses that bloomed every single spring without fail, a living testament to a love that refused to die. And sometimes, if they were there late in the afternoon, they would see a man and a woman walking hand in hand along the winding path. The man would be holding a small bunch of wildflowers, and they would stop for a while at the grave under the willow. He would place the flowers gently on the stone, and the woman would squeeze his hand. They would stand in quiet companionship for a few moments, then turn and walk back towards the gates, back towards the noise and the light of the living world. The man was William. He still came to visit, but he no longer came to mourn. He came to remember. He came to say thank you. He came to introduce the woman he loved, and the woman with the honey-colored eyes who had taught him how to live again, to the woman who had taught him how to love in the first place. And in that quiet, sacred space, beneath the whispering willow, two summers met, the one that had passed and the one that was still blooming, a testament to the enduring, powerful, and ever-changing nature of love. The final farewell wasn't an end, but a transformation, a grief that moved the world to tears, yes, but also a love that moved one man to finally, truly live.